Here's 10 reasons why I stuck with Sony over other camera brands, but stay to the end because I also got reasons why you shouldn't even bother with Sony. One of the biggest things that separates Sony and other competitors is how well they do their video autofocus. As a hobbyist photographer, I didn't appreciate this feature until I started doing more video. I started with the Nikon D7000 as my first DSLR, and the photos were great, but the continuous video autofocus was just not there. And neither was the focus on my face when I was shooting YouTube videos. So I had to do things like dial my focus manually. Of course, getting it wrong more times than right. Imagine doing that by yourself. So when I had the Sony a6500, I was in focus 99.99% of the time. Every Sony camera I've used since then had the same, if not better, results. For solo content creators and solo camera operators, this feature is too good to ignore. Another huge influence of what camera system you use is the lenses available for it. Back when Sony went mirrorless, there wasn't nearly as many lenses as they have today. So many adapted Canon lenses to their Sony bodies. Autofocus was less than ideal though. Today, it's Sony that has plenty of lenses and Canon has fewer. So if you needed to, you could sell your old camera lenses to pick up new Sony ones that are more affordable, lighter, and quieter. Next up is customizability. As you start to get accustomed to your camera, you'll want to get certain buttons, modes, and settings quicker. Unlike my Nikon that I started out with, I was able to access 2 custom settings by the switch of a dial when I was using the Canon 80D. But with Sony, I had 3 custom modes on the dial, in addition to dedicated custom buttons with the option to remap the other buttons on the camera. There was a time I went from Sony to Canon for the affordability and availability of used premium full-frame lenses. But I went back to Sony because I missed having more video functionality out of the cameras that I was using. Although I had nice lenses, the Canon bodies left me wanting more. Because with Sony's full-frame cameras, there are features like Super 35 mode and clear image zoom. If you use an APS-C lens on a full-frame body, it's common that your digital camera will be able to capture images without vignetting. However, Sony didn't just apply this punching in for APS-C lenses only, but also gave the option to punch in with full-frame lenses as well. Why would you want to do this? In case you need a little more reach. Imagine getting 1.5 times more reach without sacrificing quality. With Sony Super 35 mode, your 35mm full-frame lens becomes like a 50mm, as if you had 2 lenses in one setup. If you still needed reach for video, you could use clear image zoom. Again, it's not a digital zoom, but clear image zoom. This enables you to zoom in even more from 1.5 to 2 times zoom without losing much quality at all. In summary, your prime lenses will become zoom lenses and your zoom lenses have more reach than before. But of all the Sony features, there's still IBIS, which was a big reason to switch to Sony for me. Although it's not a complete replacement for a gimbal, it's a convenient feature to have. This was important for me when I started out, because I didn't know that I needed things like a gimbal or a fluid head just to get stable video footage, because I just handheld everything. So having IBIS was a great help until I got all those stabilizers. But even without them, it's a joy to have the lightest setup possible and still shoot great stable footage. But this is all just one side of Sony's story, because there's still downsides of this system. But before I mention those, comment down below what camera you're currently using and what makes you continue to use it. So here's the thing, to get to most of Sony's features, you have to dig through the menus, lots of them. Unless you're willing to sit there and explore what the menus have to offer, one can easily be annoyed with going through multiple menus to program the exact settings they want. I mean, it's okay if you do it once or a few times, but over time, it may drive you crazy, especially if you don't use your own custom menu that you have in the settings. But Sony did just change up their menu, so it did get better with the newer cameras. But in those menus, be mindful of an option to deal with the next downside, overheating. Yes, they gave us 4K, but unless you got fans in the camera bodies like the cinema line cameras like the Sony FX30 and FX3, you'll have to work around by setting your temperature tolerance to high and pull your camera screens away from the body. Of course, your results may vary on the conditions of where you shoot, but still this is something to keep in mind, especially when you're shooting with APS-C bodies, because they have a shorter battery life. Plus, if you think you can prolong this overheating from blacking out your camera by shooting in 1080p, that 1080p is much softer than 4K. So if you don't want to compromise footage quality, be mindful of how you shoot your 4K. But it doesn't just stop with the hardware, because there are also software limitations. Unlike companies such as Panasonic and Fujifilm that have software updates every now and then, the software updates from Sony are few to none. Like for the pro users of the flagship Sony A1, despite having the expectation that this camera is going to keep up with the latest and greatest features that Sony has to offer, it still continues to lack where entry-level Sony cameras are blessed, like having features such as animal eye autofocus and focus breathing compensation. Even without software updates, there's still other features that you may find lacking. As someone who owns the Sony FX30, the latest camera to Sony's cinema line, it doesn't have certain features of a typical cinema camera like shutter angle and waveform. Even for the nearly $5,600 Sony FX6, it has XLR ports, but it's all in the handle. Can't say they won't ever put it in a body because its predecessor, the FS5, had one in the handle and the body. So like most camera brands, Sony's not going to give you the perfect camera. But the good news is, whether you're a beginner or a pro, you can get a feature-packed camera that you can grow with and not feel like you have to spend thousands on top of what people used to spend back in the day. That's why I downgraded from the $3,500 Sony a7S III to two $1,700 Sony FX30s over here. Fam, mga kapatid, thanks again for watching. Now go out there and shoot for the life that matters. See ya!